Thank you all for being present today. I truly appreciate and I hope that the lecture will be informative and helpful. This is actually a short course about academic writing, and I will try to share with you insights and information about the subject in general. And I say in general because there are details for each part of the subject that can be easily developed into full lectures that will take long time, and of course you are going to be bored, so I'm sticking to the general and basic notions. By the end of this lecture, I'm confident that the content will clarify the most important parts about academic writing and also simplify some complex concepts that can be confusing, and this is especially true for newer students. In all cases, academic writing should be clear, should be unambiguous, concise, structured, and of course it should be in all times backed up by data and evidence. Of course, we want to have a formal tone and we want to have a formal style of writing, but it should not be actually complex and it does not require the use of long, sophisticated sentences and any sort of elaborate vocabulary unless you are actually using the specific terminology of it. So as I was saying, actually, we want to have a very formal style of writing. We want to have something that is going to be written in a formal tone, but we should not use very complex phrases, and we don't want to have lots of elaborate vocabulary unless you are actually using the technical terminology of the field or the actual jargon of the field. So again, these contents that we will be discussing today are going to be very useful for writing papers, writing articles, writing essays, long dissertations like a master's thesis or a PhD thesis, and academic material in general. So for shorter assignments, maybe some parts do not really apply. Still, the overall content and the overall approach should be very helpful, even for brief assignments and for short essays. These are going to be useful too, but of course, we are not going to be applying all of the intricate details that I will be sharing with you today. So first of all, why writing skills are important in academic settings. Of course, they are important in academic settings, they are important in other settings, but our focus, of course, is going to be academia. So as you already know, any student that is in a high-level institution is going to be usually required to write lots of dissertation, a variety of papers, many essays, many assignments, and this is going to be done throughout the whole journey of their academic studies, and they are going to be writing and producing essays and texts for a quite long period of time. And this is going to be taking a lot of their efforts during the years of their university or college studies. So these writing tasks and assignments will cover a myriad of goals, lots of goals and objectives, and several purposes. Of course, sometimes you are going to be required to write something that is about your own experiences. Other times it's going to be about something that is the subject of scientific research. Other times you are going to be required to discuss things with your classmates. Other times you are required to write for the sake of improving your own writing. So depending on the subject, depending on the class, you are going to be writing different things, different types of writing, different objectives, etc. Of course, as I told you, sometimes these assignments can be written just by displaying and sharing your own personal experiences, your own previously acquired knowledge. And in that case, there is no really any need for effective research, but still you need to have very good writing, even for these types of assignments where you are not required to have any sort of research. So other times, essays are not going to be that simple, between brackets. Essays will require some extra efforts and additional research and the use of some external sources. So when we say sources, which sources can we actually use? Are they going to be considered as valid? Are they recent? Are they relevant? Because there is really no need of quoting or referencing work that has been done very long ago and it has become obsolete. Of course, sometimes some old references can still be valid and very valuable, but other times, especially in technical fields, technology is evolving very fast. Medical fields are also evolving very fast, and some articles, some papers, some sources are going to be obsolete or very irrelevant, so you cannot use those. This sounds quite confusing. Of course, especially for new students, how can they discern good sources from bad sources, from relevant sources, etc. So can it get any more confusing? And unfortunately, the answer is yes, it can be confusing actually, because sometimes students are going to be required to write essays in very limited amount of time. Sometimes this is going to be a class that this is going to be a task actually that is carried out in class. So it's going to be requiring from the students to write about something within a few minutes or within 1 hour. Okay. Other times you are going to be having a longer essay to write, but the actual deadline is quite short. In all cases, you need to be aware that this is going to be another additional challenge to writing a good essay or to writing a good actual text. But regardless of the actual assignment, you have to keep in mind that understanding what is good writing, what are the most important pillars and components of good writing are going to be, and what are the proper techniques that you can employ. All of this understanding is going to be leading you to be able to produce a well-crafted essay. Even if you don't have lots of time, you are going to be efficient and very effective and highly productive if you understand how you are going to be proceeding with writing actually. So good writing is going to be also an important skill for your academic endeavors, but also this is going to be translating into any sort of career field. So nearly all professions are going to be requiring some form of writing, some form of written production, regardless actually of the field, regardless of the industry where you work, you are going to be writing at some capacity, and you need to know that good writing is going to be always making a positive impact. So writing is then an important skill to acquire. I hope that by now you are actually very convinced that you should know how to write properly, so that you are going to be making the right impact, so that you are going to be able to express your opinions and thoughts, so that you are going to be considered as a very interesting student, or later on as a very interesting expert or professional. And when we say writing, you have to understand that we need to come up with a certain process to write. We need to understand that writing is not going to be a simple task that is carried out in few minutes. You have to understand that it's a fully developed process, especially for higher education and for professional endeavors. You have to keep in mind that you have to come up with your own writing strategies. You have to understand how to write an academic paper. You have to know how to structure an academic paper. This is going to be very useful if you have everything in mind that is set into place, and you are going to be able actually to follow a certain process. You need to develop your own process. I'm going to be giving you here some hints and clues, but you need to develop your own personal process that you are going to be employing over and over again. And of course, you can customize it, you can improve it, you can tweak it, but in the end, it's going to be your own process that can be different from the textbook process or what I am proposing here. But in the end, if it's working, if it's efficient, if you are producing very good writings, this is the point. Again, writing will always require to have a process. Also, you have to understand how you are going to be organizing your ideas, because you can be having lots of ideas, and I am sure that you have encountered people in your life or professors who are very knowledgeable. They are very good at understanding the scientific matter, but they cannot really explain things. They don't have a very clear organization of ideas and thoughts, and this is going to be challenging for them to make things clearer for other people, for students, etc. So you need to know how to organize your own ideas and how you are going to be writing them. So first of all, we have to understand what are the writing elements that you should consider. Of course, these are things that you probably already know, but let's clarify them for good. First of all, you have to understand what is required. What is the assignment or the task about? What are you writing? What type of essay? What type of paper? So in order to be doing that, in order to understand exactly, you have to decompose the matter. You have to decompose and to simplify actually these different parts. So you are going to be wanting to define the things that need some sort of definition. You have to understand all of the technical terminology. Okay, after that, you need to have a good grasp of the overall literature about the subject. So you are going to be interested in the corpus of production of literature and publications and articles about that subject. You are going to be trying to see what are the arguments from one side, what are the counter arguments, so the arguments from the other side. You need to develop your own personal views about that subject, okay? And then you need to look into recent examples that are discussing or that are explaining the subject that you are writing about. And this is going to be helping you understand why this is an interesting subject. Because if you are not interested in the subject, you are not going to be able to write correctly. Not going to be able to produce efficient and good writing and a good text in the end. So you have to start by focusing on these few elements, and these few elements are going to be very helpful for you to create an initial draft. So this is a proposed, of course, let's say process. It's a suggested general process. You are going to be starting by understanding what is required from you. Okay, and once you understand what is required from you, you are going to be taking into account all of the instructions that are listed by your professor or that are listed for the task, and then you can move on to the step of brainstorming. And brainstorming is going to be important. I will explain a little bit later what is brainstorming and the different techniques that we can employ for brainstorming. And you have to carry out some elementary research, which is going to be very helpful for you to define your overall outline. And by outline, we mean the map that you are going to be using for your essay, for your assignment. After that, you are going to be able to write your first draft, rough draft, which is going to be stating your main thesis. So main thesis statement here actually means the main idea, okay? Main thesis or main idea are let's say virtually the same thing in this context. After you have written your rough draft, you can make some deeper and more detailed research, and you are able to do so because during the writing process of the first draft, there are things that are not very clear, or there are things that actually need more details or more information. So you are going to be deepening your research, you are going to be deepening your knowledge by carrying out further research. After that, after the deeper detailed research, you will be able to improve and refine your initial draft, and you are going to be even sometimes revisiting and reviewing and improving your outline. After that, you are going to be having a draft that we can call as a pre-final. It's a pre-final draft. You are almost there. You still need some proofreading to make sure that you don't have any mistakes. You need to reflect a little bit more. Can you add something? Can you actually augment some details or not? And then you are going to be making a final review, finalize the text, and then you can submit the text, which is going to be hopefully a very good text. So the writing process, of course, has to be adapted to different assignments. You are not going to be always writing long papers or dissertations. Sometimes you are going to be writing shorter things. Sometimes the subject is quite technical, so there is not a lot of writing probably. So according to the subject, according to your deadline or your time frame, according to the type of content that is required from you, you need to actually modify and adapt a little bit your process of writing. And also you have to keep in mind that before you start writing, you should decide how much time you are going to allocate for every part of the process. I said define your process, and then understand how you are going to be actually doing the writing part, and then decide on the time that you are going to be allocating, or the time that you are going to be spending on every part of the writing process. It's very important to do so in the beginning, because you can run out of time, and if you are running out of time, you are going to be stressed out, and you are going to be doing things that will actually be very, very detrimental to your writing. So let's move on to define few things and to understand how to do certain things. First of all, sources and content research. As I told you, sources are very important. These are going to be the building blocks of your writing, okay? So once you know the scope and the subject of the task of the assignment, you need to start making some research, as I said, so some preliminary research, but it can be confusing, especially again for newer students. It can be quite confusing where to start. Okay, it's not that easy of a task in the beginning. So of course, where to start, because what are credible sources or resources, where to find them, and how many resources do I need? These can be all legitimate questions that you can ask yourself, and you need actually to understand that these are going to be, of course, some of them are going to be fixed in the rock. Let's say these are going to be things that will not change, like what are credible sources. These are not changing according to the subject, especially within academia, but how many resources and where to find them can be a little bit different according to the task at hand. So as a definition, as a simple definition, you can say that a credible source for academic writing is going to be one whose accuracy is supported by academic peer review, or it's going to be coming from a foundation of relevant established research. So this is to say that a source is going to be having a solid authority within its discipline, because it's written by well-recognized authors, because it's published by well-recognized publishers, because it's published by an organization, etc. So the main credible sources, of course, that you are going to be using are going to be split into these categories mainly. Of course, if you are having a class, if you are studying in the college or university, you are going to be having for every subject textbooks. So textbooks for the subject are, of course, a credible source of information. But there are other books that are published by recognized authors and publishers, and those are going to be discussing the same subject, and maybe sometimes they are even given different arguments, etc. These are also very good credible sources. You have also the papers that are published in scientific journals, and here things like the impact factor, things like the publication history of the journal are going to be very good indicators of the credibility of the source. You can also rely on scholar and official websites that are regularly updated. These are going to be the .gov websites or .edu websites, etc. These are going to be generally very credible sources too. You can also rely on scientific repositories and scholar databases to find certain data, to find certain information, but these are a little bit more advanced actual sources of information. So a credible source in the end is going to be a source that is reviewed and that is actually supported by experts in the field, and it's going to be citing its own sources. Every source is going to be citing other sources. If you take a book, in the end you will have references. If you take a paper, in the end you have references and citation in the text. So every source can be also considered, it's a source of information, but it's also a source of other credible resources or sources. And generally you are going to be having lots of information from these other sources to generate and support different ideas, different concepts, different arguments. A very famous example of a source that is used in academic settings and in other settings is actually Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, for example, is not of course, a credible source, because any one of you can actually go now and open a page in Wikipedia and change the text, edit the text, and write something that is completely wrong, and still it's going to be published on Wikipedia, okay? Sometimes, of course, you are going to be finding articles that are completely and verifiably true, and they are correct 100%, but there is no academic authority that is present to validate that it's true or not. So this is why we don't use Wikipedia as a source in academic settings. It can be used as a starting point so that you can understand certain things, so that you can define certain terminology, so that you have an overall idea about the subject. But in the end, you are not going to be using Wikipedia as a source of information. Also, you must determine what content will you look for in these credible sources to research your topic and to make yourself a sort of expert in the topic, at least for the time of the writing project. And then the number that is needed for sources is going to be also depending on the type of task. It's going to be different from one assignment to another, from one writing assessment to another, because sometimes you are going to be just needing 1 or 2 references for simpler, shorter assignments, and sometimes some other times you are going to be requiring actually you are required to include hundreds of resources. For instance, if you are writing a PhD thesis or even a master's degree thesis, you are going to be including you are going to be generally including, depending on the subject again, lots of resources and references. So during the research step, as I told you have to start saving and start collecting and gathering interesting sources and trying to summarize all of the thoughts that you consider as important or as attention grabbing, and you have to try to immerse yourself in the literature published recently, again, because you don't want to reference or to cite something that is obsolete. And sometimes I give, for instance, assignments about, I don't know, let's say electronic health records, and I find some students referencing articles from 1995, which is like prehistory for electronic health records. So again, try to keep yourself reading things that are published recently and that are going to be relevant. Of course, in other fields, I don't know, like psychology, you can be using older references. In history, you can be using other references, but in epistemology also, you can be using all the references, but in general, for technical subjects, for medical sciences, for biomedical sciences in general, you are going to be wanting to use up-to-date publications. So if you have carried out a good research of the subject and you are now having lots of resources and lots of articles and publications that you can actually use, the main outcome of a good research is that you are going to be having logical information, chunks and parts in your mind, but also drafted out or written out somewhere on your paper, on a piece of paper, on your computer, etc. You are going to be also having some themes of knowledge and some levels of content. You know that this part that you have read in this article is going to be covering this part in your own paper. Let's move on to brainstorming. I have actually mentioned brainstorming during the process. Right after you make your research, you can start brainstorming. So what is brainstorming? I'm sure that most of you are already familiar with the concept of brainstorming, but keep in mind that the purpose or the goal of brainstorming and critical thinking is going to be making you able to make better decisions and choices for your paper. So you have already read some literature about the paper, you have a good understanding of the subject. Now you are going to be brainstorming. So you will use brainstorming for increased awareness and searching for deeper and clearer understanding of your assignment, of your paper, of the task that you are writing about in general. So generally what I advise is that if you can have some group brainstorming sessions. It's always good, even if you are going to be having individual tasks. For instance, you can gather as a group of students who are working on the same subject or who are working on different subjects even, and then you discuss briefly what you have. You make a a sort of presentation of what you have read about, what are your thoughts, and then you start the brainstorming session. Of course, you might have some input even from students who are working on different things. So this can be helpful. Group brainstorming is always advised, even for tasks that are carried out individually. Of course, afterwards, after you carry a brainstorming session, you are going to be on your own, writing your own personal text, and producing the text or the essay or the dissertation that you wanted to produce. And the ideas that were generated during the brainstorming session will be very helpful, and I'm sure of that. But of course, if you cannot carry out, because you cannot carry out all the time group brainstorming sessions, you can actually carry out a brainstorming session by yourself. You can sit down and try to generate many thoughts and ideas that are relevant to your subject. You are going to be wanting to rely on one of these techniques for brainstorming. So you are going to be asking yourself or the group of people that you are working with many and varied questions about the subject, okay, about the topic, and you try to answer them. And those answers are going to be a starting point for developing your own content. You can use free writing. So what is free writing? Free writing is that you take a piece of paper and you start writing freely without any constraints about what you understand from the subject, from the instructions of the assignment. Okay, and you write freely. You can take a piece of paper, you can use your text editor in your computer and write, just write, and then you are going to be rereading what you wrote, and from there you can start. This also is a very good brainstorming technique. You can also break down the topic into different levels. This is specifically interesting if you are going to be having a longer dissertation, a longer text to write. In general, you can rely on breaking down into topics. Also, you can rely on clustering and mapping and webbing your ideas, and there are lots of tools online that you can use for these things, but these are generally for things like master's thesis or PhD thesis. You are going to be wanting to do some clustering because you need your ideas to be connected and to be relevant and to be valid throughout the thesis. So thesis statement, or the main idea statement here, thesis in the meaning of we are meaning idea here. So the main idea statement, or the thesis statement, announces the topic of your essay and what you want to say about this topic. Okay, so it's going to be your main idea. And what makes a good main idea? What makes a good thesis? It has some characteristics, some traits that need to be fulfilled in order to actually have a good thesis statement, a good main idea statement. So first of all, it must be a statement, not a question. Here you are wanting to assert things. You are making affirmation. You are not asking questions. Okay, so you are wanting to have a main idea statement as an affirmation. It's not a question, it's a statement. Also, it must be clear, it must be concise, and it must be a complete sentence. Okay, it's not just 3 words. It's also an opinion. It's your opinion. As I said, you have to develop a sort of point of view, and it's your opinion based on the research that you have made, based on what you have read from the literature, and it has to show intent. It's not a statement of a simple fact that is already known by everyone, and this is specifically important for long papers. Again, it should have only one main guiding idea. You don't want actually to mix lots of ideas in the same statement. So once you are able to define this main idea, you have to pin it down. You have to write it down in a very clear statement or assertion. Again, it's a task where you want to affirm things. You are not questioning things. So it's unfortunate, but it's virtually impossible to write a good essay without a good and a clear main idea, without a clear main thesis in your writing. This is going to be fundamental, and it's crucial that the main idea is very clear to the reader, whether it's the professor who is correcting your paper or to other readers who can be reading your work. So a thesis statement should be specific, of course, and not too general. You can have sometimes some general statement or main idea statement if you are writing something that is very long, and then you are going to be having sub-components, and you are going to be having other minor statements in your writing. But generally, you have to avoid very general statements. You need to be a little bit more specific. So to sum it up, a main idea statement or a thesis statement should express your point of view on the subject that you are actually working on. It should introduce and anchor your arguments, your main points that validate your main idea. And also for longer essays, it should be stated explicitly in the introduction and in the conclusion. So if you are writing a long essay or a long paper, you should reference a little bit your main idea briefly, both in the introduction, and then you echo it again in the conclusion. And also, it should be validated by providing evidence in your essay. If you are not able to produce any sort of evidence or information or data that support your main idea, this means that your main idea is not worthy of being written in the subject. And this is specifically true for advanced writing, because you actually want to have that type of evidence to support your thoughts, to support your ideas. So let's move on to dissecate a little bit a paper or an assignment text. What is the overall outline, or what is the map that you are going to be using? So it's going to be always very good to sketch out your essay before straight away writing it out. So you are going to be using actually short sentences. You are going to be desiccating and saying, okay, my writing is going to be having this part and this part and this part. And of course, you will have lots of online tools that can help you create an outline or an essay map that will be very useful to develop later on by adding the real text that you. So for your outline, you have to use short sentences to describe the paragraphs that you will write, and also you can use bullet points to describe what paragraph or what content is going to be in which paragraph. So you are going to be saying this paragraph is going to be having this type of content, and use bullets. You don't need to write full sentences. In the end, you are going to be ending up with something that is similar to this. Depending on the size and depending on the length of the work, you are going to be having, of course, an introduction that can be 1 sentence or 2 sentences if it's a short assignment, and it can be many paragraphs if it's a long work. And in the end, you have also a conclusion, and the conclusion generally is going to be the shortest part of the work, generally. And you are going to be having the main idea. Generally, in academic papers, you will have one main idea, and you need to support that idea with different details. But for, again, longer dissertations, you can have more than just one main idea. Draft. I told you, once you have done the research and the brainstorming, you can start drafting. So a draft is going to be a sort of precursor or preliminary and initial effort form of your essay. It's going to be subject to revision, of course. You need to amend it, you need to improve it, you need to refine it later on in order to come up with your final text. So at this time of drafting, generally do not worry about your introduction. Introduction should be written later, and you have also to try and set up, as I told you, set up your own process, but also set up your own work environment. So pick up the way that is the most comfortable for you to work and to be productive and to write in the best conditions and in the best settings. So choose your favorite location, maybe have your own desk or office if you can. Choose your tools. Do you want to start writing on your computer, or do you rely on handwriting? It's up to you, but pick something and make it a part of your writing process. Then write your first draft as fast or as rapidly as you can in order to avoid the blank page syndrome or the writer's block syndrome. And of course, if you have parts or sections that you cannot write yet because you don't understand them very well or they are very complex, you can bracket them out or highlight those parts and say these are going to be written later. But try to write a first draft as soon as you finish the research and the brainstorming. Proofreading. What is proofreading? So proofreading, of course, means examining your essay very cautiously in order to find out and spot and correct mistakes in things like grammar, style, and spelling, but also review the overall ideas and the structure, etc. So there are also lots of online tools here, but it's better to do it yourself again. For all of these tasks, actually, you can use online tools, but in the beginning, especially if you are a new students and you don't know really how to write in the beginning, it's always better to do all of these things manually. It will take you some time in the beginning, but once you have actually finished that learning curve, um, go faster and to write a very good text by relying on all of these processes that I have already discussed. So before proofreading, of course, you have to be sure that you have reviewed and brushed up and improved all of the important aspects of your content. You don't want actually to start making corrections at the level of sentence or word if you still need to work on the overall paper, if you still need to work on your main ideas or arguments, if you still need to organize and structure your paper. Okay, so start by actually making sure that you have a final writing when it comes to structure, focus, organization, and overall ideas, and then you can move on to proofreading. So, of course, it's advised to leave some time between the writing process and the proofreading. So depending on your time frame, depending on your timeline, depending on your deadline, depending also on your personality, you can actually leave your paper aside for a while. This can be few hours or even few days, no longer than that, because after a few days you are going to be starting to forget certain things. So leave it out, or leave it aside for a while, because some distance from the content will always help you see mistakes faster. You are a little bit more detached from the text, and you can spot very quickly errors and mistakes faster and quite easily. So of course, it's going to be always it's always a good idea to leave some time between the writing and the proofreading. Also, it's very important before you actually start proofreading to eliminate any sort of unnecessary words, and you have to remove any sort of redundancy, anything that is extra, that does not really serve the purpose. You have to remove it. And it's very important to keep in mind that here we want to write short, clear, concise, direct, and formal sentences. And also, you can create a list of most frequently committed mistakes. Let's call it like this. This is going to be a list of mistakes that you generally make. Okay, and you are going to be collecting this from your own experience, but also from the previous comments of your professors on your old papers. You are going to be able to set a list of mistakes you need to watch for, because these are the mistakes that you are generally making. So this is always a good idea to have a list. It should be written, but after a while, these are going to be things that you will remember yourself, and you know that you are very prone to make certain mistakes rather than others. So now you are ready actually for the actual proofreading of your paper or of your essay in general. You are going to be checking things like spelling and grammar, punctuation, your formatting, is it okay, the accuracy of the details, are you using the right style for referencing and citations, etc. So your text editing software here is going to be very valuable. You are going to be using certain functions that will help and facilitate and make the process quite faster. So you can use the spell check and the search functions to find mistakes that you are likely to make, or to correct the spelling of a word that you know that generally you forget how to write it, so you generally write it incorrectly. And here again, the list of common mistakes you created will be very helpful. Keep in mind that proofreading can seem a little bit tedious, and you are going to be feeling a little bit bored because you are reading something that you have already wrote. What's the point? But first of all, it's going to be improving your current production, your current text, but also in the future, this is going to be actually making you a better writer. This is going to be anchoring certain behaviors in your mind, and automatically you are going to be a better and faster writer. So the process of proofreading will help you write better content in the future too. So this is very, very important to keep in mind. So the time you waste on proofreading is going to be reinvested in the future. Let's discuss a little bit the main parts of a paper. You probably already know this, but let's fix some concepts and ideas. First of all, you have the introduction. Some essays do not really require a full introduction, but generally you need some sort of introduction, even if it's few words. But let's talk about fully developed introductions. You have to understand that the introduction is going to be signaling the topic in an interesting and attention-grabbing way. You want to let's say anchor and attach the reader so that they are curious to read what you have written. It's going to be also announcing the main points of the paper. It's going to be including your main idea statement, your thesis statement. And again, thesis here means the main idea. And in my opinion, you should not write your introduction in the first place. It's the first thing that the reader is going to be reading, but probably you don't want to start by writing the introduction. The introduction needs to be written at least after you write your main body. So the length of the introduction should always be proportional to your full paper. It should not be too long. It should not be too short, but generally what we see, especially in dissertations, in longer essays, that we have very long introductions, and very long introductions are not actually very good because they don't give the right perception to the reader, especially if he's or she's someone who is correcting your work. So again, the introduction should be attention grabbing. It should be pleasant to read, and it can give sort of a glimpse about how you are going to support your thesis. And again, this is important because you want to keep the reader attached to your text. They're actually eager to learn more about what you have written. Okay. Keep in mind also that an introduction should not present general factual information, nor start with a definition that you have just taken from a dictionary or from an encyclopedia. Okay, it should not be a cliche. It should not be a general truth. It should not be a grand generalization that everyone knows. Even if you ask someone who is walking in the street, they probably know that information. This is not something that you want to include in your introduction. So introduction, right after the introduction, you are going to be having the main body, the main content. Okay, so the main body, oh, this is a picture of my lunch. I'm sorry, it's not supposed to be here, but as it's here, let's discuss something actually. How do we judge the quality of a burger? Do we judge the quality of the burger by the bread, by the buns outside? Generally, we are going to be deciding the quality or judging the quality of the burger by the essential parts, which is generally the cheese and the meat. You can say also sauces or pickles or things like that, but we are deciding on the quality of a hamburger or a burger or cheeseburger by the quality of the main body. So if we are not having an interesting main body, you can have the best bread out there, the best bread buns out there for your burger. You are not going to be satisfied with that burger. So the main body is very important. Like for the burger, it's the same thing for your text. The main body is going to be the most important thing in your writing. So depending on your paper instructions, depending on what you are required to write, what is the overall subject, the length and the number of paragraphs in the main section are going to be varying from just one main paragraph to several paragraphs. So you can end up with a burger that looks like this, where you have many paragraphs that are covering the main body, and these are going to be, of course, harder to develop and they will take longer time. And this is going to be, you are going to be ending up with something that will have lots of corpse and lots of content, and you are going to be wanting to split your main body into different parts. Or you can have something like this, okay, where the main body is just one paragraph, and this does not mean that the previous one is better. The previous burger is not better than this one necessarily. If you have very good meat here and very good cheese, you can have a better burger who looks like this than the previous one. But this is you actually producing and writing according to your instructions. If this is what your professor asked for, this is what you want to write. You don't want to have many paragraphs and very long main body if you don't need it, if it's not required from you. It can be actually seen as a drawback if you are writing more than what is required. So this is going to be a short example of an overall anatomy of a paragraph. You are going to be having to start with the presentation of the topic, and then you are going to be starting actually to state the main supporting facts and ideas, and then you are going to be proving the claim. You are going to be affirming the claim in the end of the paragraph. So you are going to be wanting to be quite careful not to present facts that do not support the idea. You want to only present facts that support your main idea, and you want in the end to end up with a transitional sentence that will move us to the next paragraph in the main body, or that will move us to the conclusion, depending again on what you are writing. So what can we put in the main body? We have seen for burgers, we are going to be putting meat and cheese and lettuce and tomatoes and pickles and sauces. But for a text, what are we going to put? So the main body paragraphs are going to be including different things, and they are going to be developing into relevant paragraphs that can cover things like historical backgrounds, things that like the current mainstream versus other alternative theoretical viewpoints. So you are going to be always having a mainstream idea, whether it's correct or not. This is a different discussion, a different subject, but you are going to be having generally for every subject a mainstream idea and other alternative viewpoints. Sometimes you are not required to develop on the alternative theoretical points. Sometimes you need to just focus on that current mainstream idea or theory. You can also have things like possible approaches to the subject, so things like empirical approaches, critical, historical, technical, even philosophical approaches, or things that are coming from epistemology, etc., that will actually help you develop your main body. And you are going to be always having a very good grasp on the current state of research studies. These are going to be helping you support your main idea. I think I skipped. Yes. Other things about the main idea, you are going to be wanting to include sometimes definitions of words and concepts. If these are new words or a terminology that is very specific to a certain field, or new concepts that are not very well known, you can actually define them. You can also include things related to major issues and questions that are raised about the subject, about the field also. You can sometimes include things related to the major theories to answer those questions if these are relevant theories. For shorter essays, again, you are not going to be needing things like this. You can include things about techniques, about methodologies and methods that are going to be used if you are writing something that is experimental or something that is covering an experimental side of things. And as usual, this is going to be, again, very different depending on the instructions that you have for your writing, for your work. Sometimes you are going to be having works where you need all of this, especially if you're writing things like PhD theses and dissertations. Other times you are going to be having different mosaico, different collections of different elements that are stated here. Conclusion. I see that I know that you are seeing the word the end, and you are saying, I hope he's ending the presentation. This is very long, but we are not yet there. I'm talking about the conclusion of your paper. So remember, as I told you, a burger is going to be judged by its main body, which is the meat and the cheese, etc. But it's not a burger if you don't have the buns. Okay, we said that the outside bread from the top and the bottom, these are going to be the introduction and the conclusion. And without these, it's not a burger. If you put me some meat patties on a plate with cheese and lettuce, I'm not going to be saying this is a burger. Okay, so it's very important to have good, actually, introduction and also very good conclusion. A burger is only outstanding if it has top and bottom buns. A text or an essay or an article is only outstanding if it is only if it has good introduction and good conclusion. The introduction is very important because it will keep the reader reading, and the conclusion is very important because it will leave the last impression about the work, the last impression about the author of the work. So the conclusion should briefly restate the main idea and should echo it again, but in a different way, in a simpler and shorter way. It's not you copying out parts of your main body into your conclusion. This is not what we mean here. Then you need to have a sort of a bridging sentence that will actually link or connect the restated ideas to a final sentence. And the final sentence is going to be, of course, a very interesting exit sentence, a question, a fact to make the reader think about new perspectives, about future trends, about other related concepts, about future developments, etc. So you need to keep opening the horizons in front of the reader. Opening the horizons is going to be done through any of these examples. The conclusion, of course, is going to be stating to the reader that you are winding up, you are ending, you are preparing to finish off the writing, or you have actually terminated or finished your paper. And in the conclusion, it's always advised to rephrase, again, as I told you, the main statement along with other main ideas of your paper. So the conclusion should be a logical wind-up or an end to what has been previously discussed throughout the paper, throughout the writing, throughout the essay, throughout the dissertation. It should never contain any new information unless it's something about opening new horizons, about actually questioning the future, about asking about perspectives or suggesting different solutions for a problem. Usually it's the shortest part of the essay, and it's going to be adding to the overall quality and the overall impact of the essay. It should be always, as I told you, this is the last thing that the reader will read from you, whether the reader is a professor or another reader who is reading your work. This is the last thing, so you want to keep it up to par. You want to keep it at the level of what you have written previously. The conclusion should not just be a summary. Sometimes I read conclusions and they are just summarizing what they have already written in the main body. It's not what is required in a conclusion. Also, the conclusion should not end with a long quotation. You should not even include a long quotation in a conclusion. And you should also understand that a conclusion should not just focus on minor points of your argument, and you should never again introduce any new material. Again, this is important to keep in mind. The conclusion is going to be tying or linking or connecting together the various issues that were enclosed and encompassed in the body of the paper, and to comment on the meaning of the whole writing. So you are going to be including things like implications resulting from your own arguments. You are going to be formulating recommendations. You are going to be talking about future perspectives, etc. The final structure, as we have seen, you are going to be having something like this. So an introduction and then a main body that will have one to many paragraphs depending on the task. And finally, you are going to be having a conclusion. And always keep in mind our friend here, the burger. Okay, so a good text is a good, or a good burger is a good analogy for a good text. So generally, you are going to be wanting to have interconnections, as I said, and ties between the different parts of your writing. And weak essays and writings do not have type these connections that can happen between the different paragraphs. So transition sentences, bridge sentences are going to be always very important when you write, and these can be tweaked in the end just before proofreading. Now, actually, we need to talk about something that is quite serious, and it's very serious for me. It's very serious for everyone who is involved in academia, except for some students who keep ignoring this. I don't know why, but they are not convinced about the seriousness of this matter. And hopefully now they are going to be convinced if they are attending this session. I'm referring to plagiarism, okay? Plagiarism, it's not a big deal, right? Why we are actually wasting our time speaking about plagiarism. If you plagiarize, you are actually losing the trust of everyone who is reading or who is actually teaching you, or anyone who is actually in academia and even outside of academia, because you are tarnishing your image, and you are tarnishing actually the, let's say, the philosophical actual approach to writing and to creativity. Okay, you are actually making a bad thing. So trust, as you know, is like a piece of paper. Once you crumple that piece of paper, it cannot be perfect again. And plagiarism is actually about trust. So you can try to flatten out that piece of paper again, try to make it look perfect, but it will never be straight ever again. Trust is the same thing. So plagiarism, what is plagiarism? Okay, the act or the instance of using or closely imitating the language and the thoughts of others, but also of yourself. Maybe you did not know this. You can plagiarize your own work, okay? And presenting the produced text as one's own new original work without giving credit to the original author or work. This is plagiarism, okay? Plagiarism is theft, okay? And even if you are plagiarizing your own work, this is very dishonest, because you are just recycling an old work and presenting it as new work, and this is not a good thing, okay? So you have to keep in mind that plagiarism always is a negative thing that is perceived by others very negatively, and you can plagiarize yourself. So of course, as you see here, lots of students fail to understand that plagiarism is very serious, and that plagiarism is something that is a no-no. It's even worse than not doing the work, or than writing something that is actually out of context or out of topic. Okay, plagiarism is very bad, and it's going to be always having consequences. So you have, in all cases, to say no to plagiarism. And you should understand that it can be easier to copy or paste or cut and paste, but this is not the way of producing right text and right essays that are going to be valuable, that are going to be a sort of addition to yourself, but also an addition to the overall corpus of knowledge in your institution, in your college, or in your university. But also, if they are interesting enough, they are going to be an overall addition to the corpus of knowledge of the country, of the world, etc. So this is why we want to avoid plagiarism at all costs. So be original and don't plagiarize. Plagiarism is going to be always having serious consequences. Of course, when it's caught, it's going to be having serious consequences for students, for scholars, for authors, for academicians, but it's going to be having a serious consequence for everyone who commits plagiarism. This is the president. This used to be actually the president of Hungary, which is a country in Eastern Europe. President Schmidt actually was caught plagiarizing parts of some of his thesis. So it was caught 20, or let's say it was caught, yes, 20 years later. And despite that, he had to quit his position as a president, just because 20 years ago, he actually committed plagiarism in some of his writings. This is Rand Paul. Rand Paul is a politician, a famous politician actually in the United States. He's also a physician, and a few years ago he was caught plagiarizing some parts of his speeches. So the things that he the false promises he was given to the audience, and parts of also of one of his books, they were plagiarized, and he got caught, and he had actually very, very serious consequences. So you see that you will always have consequences. These are going to be, of course, in the beginning, if you are a new student, your professor can be a little bit flexible. They can give you another chance for the first time, or they can just deduct few points. But on the long run, especially if it's a repeated behavior, plagiarism is going to be resulting into very serious consequences, like losing the degree, like having your reputation tarnished and ruined, and no one will actually trust you again, especially if it's produced for a master's or PhD, or for other productions later on. You are going to be subject to disciplinary actions, etc. So in all cases, you have to check the guidelines and the policies of your college and university about plagiarism, and every reputable and every honorable organization is going to be actually having this type of policies about plagiarism. So what is a source? Because to understand plagiarism, you have to understand that you are copying from a source. What is a source? We have defined very quickly previously the concept of a valid source or an accepted source. But in general, what is a source? A source is going to be any person or any content from which you get information that you are going to be using in writing your content. And this is regardless of credibility, because credibility is going to be different. From one level of academia to another, from one context to another. Outside of academia, of course, it's completely different. But these are going to be what we refer to as sources. You can have, as I said previously, the scholarly journals and books. You can have the websites and online content from specific organizations, newspapers, a colleague or a classmate, a television show, anything. All of these can be sources, but of course, not all sources are accepted or considered as credible in academic contents. But you can actually understand the overall idea from someone else. Someone else given you that thought orally or written, it doesn't matter. In all cases, it's an outside source. It's not you. So a citation, as I told you, you need to cite your sources in your paper. A citation is simply meaning clearly giving credit where credit is due, and it's going to be telling the readers where the information is coming from. This is not my idea. This is not my discovery. This is not my statement. This was actually formulated previously in another work. Okay, so in your paper, you have to cite or refer to the source of information. It's going to be looking like, I don't know, Jackson et al. 2006 have developed this technique. Okay, so this is going to be a part that is written in your paper, the citation. The reference is going to be, of course, different. A reference is going to be giving the reader details about the source. So you are going to be having the name of the source, where it was published, the name of the author, the date of publication, and generally you are going to be putting your references in the end of your paper or of your work. So these are going to be listed at the end, and a reference is going to be again giving all of the details that are required by the reader to understand where this is coming from, to actually judge is it a good source or not, and also to have access if they need that source themselves. They can get access to that source if they follow your reference. Some good news, finally. You don't need to rely on citation and references for certain cases. So sometimes you can write something and get away with it without citing anything. So the first thing is common knowledge. Common knowledge, of course, refers to well-known facts or information that appear in several known sources, and this is going to be rendering or making these facts familiar to a large number of people or to professionals in a given field, okay? So things like Riyadh is the capital city of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Do I need to provide a citation for that? I don't need. Human cell nucleus contains DNA, same thing. Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, same thing. Real Madrid is the best football team in the world. For this one, especially, I don't need to provide any evidence. It's for sure. I can discuss things like water freezes at 0 degrees, but Real Madrid is not something that we can discuss. Anyway, so with common knowledge statements, you don't have to cite information unless you have just simply copied that information word for word from a source, and this is not something that you want to do anyway. You want to rephrase everything that you are putting in your paper, and if you have any doubts, is it common knowledge or not, cite it. It's always better to make an extra citation of something that does not need to be cited rather than to write something that needs citation and you don't include the citation and the reference. So in addition to common knowledge, there are other cases where you don't need to make a citation. Again, things that where you are, or places where you are actually in your text expressing your own thoughts, your own experiences, your own experimental results, your own observations, insight, discoveries, etc. about a given subject. You don't need to make a citation, basically, because there is no citation. This is your own thing. And also when you are trying to assemble something from different common sense sources and come up with an idea that's based exclusively on common sense, you can go away and not cite anything. So why citing sources is important? What's the matter? Why is this a big deal? Why we are wasting our time citing the work of other people? This is our work. First of all, for the sake of honesty and for the sake of giving due credit. If you have done something, if you have written something, if you have drawn something, even if you have fixed something in your house that was broken, don't you want to get credit for it? You want to get credit for that. You want that your mother knows that you were the one who fixed the sink. I doubt it, but anyway, you can actually want to have that credit for anything that you do. You want. As humans, we tend to have that need for recognition. We tend to want to be acknowledged for anything that we do, especially if it's a good thing. If it's a bad thing, we want to hide it out, but if it's a good thing, we want to have credit for it. So why you are depriving other people from the credit they actually need or deserve? Also, to show that research and content are credible. I'm not pulling this out from my head, or this is not something that I made up. This was already published and discussed here and here and here. Also to prove the importance and the relevance of the topic that is discussed, and to help the readers actually identify further sources and have further readings, etc. So this is very important. But if it's very important to cite, why as humans we have this tendency to plagiarize? Why we want to be dishonest sometimes? So first of all, because we don't know why it's important to cite sources. And I have this discussion so many times over the years with many students who were actually confused. Why do I need actually to cite sources? It's not important. Also, when we lack the confidence in our own ideas and in our own language. I'm writing in English, I'm not very good in English, let's copy and paste. I'm not sure that I understand the question, let's Google it and copy and paste. No. So we can't also answer the writing assignment. We don't have a clue about what's required. Again, Google, copy, paste. Also, sometimes we don't know how to use the different citations. There are different styles of citation, APA, MLA, CBE, etc. And all of these are very well documented on the net. We don't know how to do it, actually. Or we have procrastinated, and this procrastination actually led us to have very short time, and we have started very late, so I don't have the time to go through my writing process. I'll copy paste. So this is why we generally tend to plagiarize. There are many actions that might be considered as plagiarized. Some of them are going to be definitely deliberate and intentional plagiarism, and others are going to be considered as possibly accidental or unintentional plagiarism. But even accidental plagiarism is still plagiarism. So if you are buying a paper from someone, if you are stealing or borrowing a paper from someone who already wrote that paper, this is, of course, deliberate plagiarism. If you are hiring and paying someone to write your paper, this is plagiarism and deliberate one. If you are copying from other sources without citing, this can be on purpose or by accident. So it can be both deliberate and accidental. If you are building on someone's idea without actually citing the initial or the original idea, again, this is plagiarism. It can be more leaning towards accidental plagiarism, or you are using sources too closely when you are paraphrasing. You did not actually rephrase and rehash the content very well. It's still very similar to the original text, and this is again plagiarism. So all plagiarism is condemnable, especially if you are advanced. If you are new students, we can be a little bit lenient until we explain things out very well, but this is going to be actually very important to understand that plagiarism is still plagiarism, even if it's accidental or unintentional. So stating all of these, it sounds like writing something that is valuable and interesting without plagiarizing is quite impossible, is it? This is a good quotation from Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso, who is a very famous, of course, artist and painter. He said, good artists copy, great artists steal. And of course, you cannot say that Pablo Picasso plagiarized the work of other people, because he came up with a new artistic trend, which is cubism, and no one actually had drawn before Picasso like he had drawn. I don't know if you have seen his work or not, but he is very different. Okay, and here by steal he means getting inspiration. It's not actually just stealing the work from someone else like the word might refer to, but it's actually taking the soul of inspiration and then putting it into something that is completely different, that is completely new. And if you see, even for this quote, there is a reference. I'm putting a reference here so that you can actually check the reference. Okay, so from this idea you can actually define the good, between brackets, good theft, which is going to be about the work of others, about studying the work of others, about actually seeing different types of work from different authors and publishers. You are going to be given credit, you are going to be transforming things and remixing things, rather than plagiarizing, rather than just stealing the work of someone, rather than making an imitation or ripping off the work completely. So you need to understand that you have the right to be inspired by the work of others, but you cannot plagiarize and simply copy or imitate the work of others. There are 10 types of plagiarism here. They are going to be here ordered from the least severe, from the most severe actually to the least severe. So the most severe is the clone, and the least severe is the retweet. We will see the details about these right now. So cloning is like wholesaling. You take the whole thing and you package it and you actually submit it. Patchwork, you are going to be taking things from here and there, or you can have idea based. So you change the text, but you keep the same idea, the same concept. So the frequency, the most frequent ones are going to be the easiest one to do, which owning, copy paste, and that's it. And the most problematic ones are also the ones that are rely on copy paste, which are cloning and Control C, Control copy. And of course, the least problematic ones are going to be the hardest one to produce, like the retweet style or the hybrid style. So clone, as you see here on the left, you have actually the original text. okay, and on the right you have actually the n original text. So as you see, it's copy paste. It's very frequent and it's very problematic because, as you see, it's all highlighted in pink. This means that the whole text is exactly similar to the original text. So this is someone who did not bother rewrite anything, and they copy it and paste it. Control C, here you are going to be having a text that will contain significant portions of another text from a single source without any sort of modification or alteration. You see that he changed one word or another here, or he added one word or another here, but basically if you look at the highlighted content in pink, this is one source and it's very similar to the original source. This is also quite frequent and it's quite problematic. It's not at all accepted to have something like this. You can have the find replace, which is going to be basically changing some keywords, using some synonyms, adding one or two words here and there. And again, you see that we are using one source, the same thing, and this is not very frequent because people who are plagiarizing, they don't even bother to change few words or to add synonyms, etc. So this is going to be looking something like this. It's not very frequent because people who are plagiarizing, they don't even understand that they need to modify something. There is the remix, and the remix, you are going to be paraphrasing from different sources. This is quite frequent, especially in advanced writers, but at least there is some effort of including different sources, of trying to paraphrase a little bit. So as you see here, we have different highlighting colors. So this means that we don't have just one source. We are having different sources and we have some sort of rewriting. Still, this is not a good thing. This can be accepted from new students, but this is not something that you want to produce for advanced writers or for advanced scholars or for advanced even students. Recycling is about plagiarizing yourself. So it's going to be borrowing very generously and very significantly from your own previous work. And again, this is not something that you want to do. Plagiarizing yourself and presenting it as a new work, it's not good. And you see, it's just one source, which is yourself. And it's quite problematic because it's not very honest. It's not very frequent generally because people who can write, they will produce texts quite frequently. Hybrid is going to be combining cited sources with copied passages from other texts without citing them. As you see here, we have this text that is highlighted in gray, and it's actually not frequent at all because it's not very easy to do and it's not very problematic. Still, it is a sort of plagiarism. We have the mashup, which is very frequent and quite problematic, which is going to be mixing up copied material from multiple sources. And you see we have different highlighting colors, so different sources, but they did not change anything. It's a complete mashup of different types of texts and works, and that's it. Copy paste from different sources, do not change anything, and you end up with a mashup. 404 error. This is not very frequent. This can be a mistake or this can be done unintentionally, but still it's a problem. It's including citations to a source that does not exist, or we have a citation that is actually not accurate at all about the sources. So you want to look for the source, you can find it, or the source is not talking about that at all. So this is going to be actually very important to understand that also this is problematic. Not very problematic, especially that it's not very frequent, but still it's not something appreciated. We have the aggregator, and the aggregator is going to be including proper citation to sources, but the paper is going to be including no original work. So here they steal, but they put the reference. Okay, so they don't rewrite, but they put the reference. It's a little bit less problematic, but it's still copy paste, and it's not very frequent, because if you are bothering putting the reference, you should have bothered rephrasing the text. We have finally the 10th type, which is the retweet, and the retweet is going to be including proper citation, but it will rely very closely on the text's original wordings or on the structure of the text, on the main ideas of the text. So it's not a good thing to do. You are just rehashing without really rephrasing. So rephrasing, I kept saying rephrasing. What is rephrasing? So when you rephrase, you have as an objective to rewrite a statement, to rewrite an idea with a different structure and by using different words without altering the original meaning and without actually changing drastically the overall content. So you are making something new from something old. So you have to keep in mind that you need to come up with your own ways to prevent yourself from plagiarizing. You have to keep yourself alert. You have, I will give you some tricks in the end, but you have to keep in mind that plagiarizing is a complete no-no. You should be actually aware that this is not a good thing, and you keep reminding yourself not to plagiarize. Maybe have a cat that watches you, and if you plagiarize, they will scratch you. I don't know, come up with your own ideas. So remember, cite all your sources. And of course, here is a, of course, little joke. Can I turn a paper without citing all sources? No. And this no is specifically taken from Hamlet, which was written by William Shakespeare. Some tips and tricks to end up the session. So you have, first of all, to avoid using redundant words, things like because of the fact, due to the fact, as we all know, each and every, the end result. All of these are words that are not very good to use in your writing. You have to pay attention to writing in active voice, not in passive voice. It's better. It's not wrong to write in passive voice specifically for some circumstances, but in general, you have to write in active voice. I have written this book, this active voice. This book was written by me. This is passive voice. You preferably want to have an active voice. You should take care with the different pronouns. So if you are saying it should be done, is it clear what it refers to in your text? Make your text again formal, and you are going to be wanting to use specific language, specific jargon. You have to avoid things that are related to chat language or slang or abbreviations and contractions, unless you have identified those abbreviations in the beginning. You have also to avoid any sort of emotive writing, because we are about writing things that are scientific. You have to avoid conscious plagiarism. So do not procrastinate. You don't leave your work to the last minute, so you just have to copy and paste. You don't have any other solution. Start as soon as you can. So if you can also find a subject that is really interesting to you, if the instructions allows you to write or to produce something about something that is good for you, or something that you like, or something that you are genuinely interested in, you can do that. Sometimes you don't have the choice, but if you have the choice, choose something that you like. Use the pre-writing strategies that we realize how easy it is to discover a plagiarized paper. Generally, we can use technology. There are lots of solutions, and we can see that this work was plagiarized from this source or from different sources. And even more, if there is a professor who is reading your work, they will probably know that this is not something that can be produced by you, and they will suspect that is plagiarized, and they will go and look online, and they will have a justification that you just copied that from another source. Also, you have to realize again the seriousness and the severity of the consequences of dishonesty, and we have talked about that. You have also to avoid unintentional plagiarism, because unintentional and accidental plagiarism are still plagiarism. So you have to take notes from the source without copying word for word. You have to follow a structured note-taking procedure, and you have to be very careful while you are copying and pasting and rewriting the pasted text as soon as you can. So copy paste, and then automatically, before you do anything else, rewrite it, reshape it, rephrase it, etc. Moreover, you have to indicate clearly in your draft, especially what ideas are your own ideas and what ideas are actually borrowed from someone else. They are not your ideas. You can use color coding. You can highlight different parts of your text to know this is my text and this is actually from another source that you have to cite and reference. You can save different draft versions if you are writing something very long. You can have different copies and you add the date in the name so that you know when was actually this written. Also, you can use different online resources and tools to detect plagiarism. So before anyone catches you, you can catch yourself and rectify. Don't forget the quotation marks and the parenthetical references whenever they are required, and this is going to be done according to your referencing style. So the referencing style of choice for us in Saudi Electronic University, which is a very good one, is the APA style, which is the American Psychological Association. It's one of the most widely used styles to cite resources. And here, as you see, we have the difference between the citation, which is here in the above. It's in your text. Okay, this is the citation. And you have the references that we are going to be listing in the end, and they will look something like this. And you have lots of details on the APA style website. You can check it out, and it's going to be very informative. Finally, reading. Reading is very good. Reading will help you write better, and books and articles will always take you new places. They will enrich your knowledge, so always keep reading. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I hope this was very informative. I hope it was not very boring. And I hope that you have enjoyed the lecture.